These are the 7 things I learned from my father, and I decided to come share them with you. Yesterday made it exactly 7 years since my dad transitioned from this side to the other side. And here are 7 lessons I picked I would like to share with you. The rest, I will leave them out, or maybe I'll share too. I was fortunate to have a father who was a preacher, and part of what that did for me is that we had the opportunity to read through the scriptures again and again. In fact, there's almost no story in the scripture that I and my father didn't have to read through. Funny enough, how did this come to be? At some point, my father had challenge with his sight, and so he would need someone to help read the Bible. Sometimes he tried reading it himself. He had a big Bible with bold letters, but at other times, he would require someone to come sit by his side and read it. So I was the person in this position many times. So I had that rare privilege of reading the scriptures with him, though at the time I was actually reading it to him. But looking back now, I would say that I had the opportunity to read the scriptures with him from Genesis to Revelation. I actually remember one particular story about the queen Athaliah. Yeah, the grandmother who wanted to kill her grandson so she could become queen. I remember that story for some weird reasons I don't know, but yeah, that's one. Another thing my father taught me is never to hold on to things tenaciously. In fact, the word tenaciously, he brought it to my consciousness. He introduced it to my vocabulary and made it stay. So my father would say and even preach in church then why we shouldn't hold on to things tenaciously. And I saw him live this out. It wasn't just a message, a theory that he thought, it was a life he lived. Many times I saw him, go out and then come back only to interact with people later, and then they will say, oh, tell your father thank you, he bought drugs for me, he did this, he did that. My father didn't have so much in material acquisition, but he had a very generous heart, and he really didn't hold on to things tenaciously. Yet another lesson that I learned from my father is my father used to teach against murmuring, grumbling, murmuring, complaining. Oh, my father taught against it. Again and again, he would use the story of the children of Israel, the several times they complained and murmured against God. He would use it to teach why you shouldn't have to murmur. I didn't know I had picked up this lesson until a few years ago after his departure. I realized that I didn't really have the strength or the likeness to endure any environment where someone was complaining or murmuring. Once you start complaining or murmuring, I find a way to remove myself from the environment. That way at home, we're at the workplace, wherever. I just find a way to remove myself from that place because it is registered in my consciousness and subconsciousness why we must not murmur, why you must not complain. And here's the interesting thing between conversations, prayers, and murmuring. When you murmur, God hears you, or the person you're murmuring against hears you, but you are not having that conversation with them. You are not calling them into the conversation. So it's like I am talking, I know you can hear me, but I'm not actually inviting you into the conversation, something like that. So the children of Israel had need many times. They wanted God to do things for them, but instead of saying, God, this is our situation, this is what we need, this is how we would like you to help us, they will just keep complaining. If we were this, we would have had this. If we were in those, if we were in Egypt, this is what our lives would have been if you didn't bring us into this wilderness, this desert, this is how our life would have been, So I learned that lesson very, very early. The need not to murmur, not to complain, because God, God detests murmuring. And in fact, it is one of the reasons why the children of Israel actually didn't enter into God's rest, the promised land, because they kept murmuring, 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 and murmuring. Another lesson I learned or I picked up growing with my father is the ability to follow leadership, to submit to authority. My father, like I said before, was a pastor. He was a junior pastor, but at some point he was a branch pastor. Though he was a branch pastor, he was following the authority from above. I remember there was one what was it called now? There was one program that used to run from the headquarters then. It involved money, where members will have to put money together and then we send it back to the headquarters. My dad never played with this. Even though the money will never be spent at the branch where he pastored, he would always encourage members to contribute this money, make payment, and send it to headquarters. He did this faithfully all the while he was a branch pastor in that church. And beyond just that particular money contribution thing now, that's how he implemented other instructions that came. If there was going to be women program at the headquarters, he would ensure the women in the church where he pastored attended. If it was going to happen at the sub headquarters, he would ensure they attend. Anywhere they had said there is a program, he would ensure that he himself or members from the church would attend the program. In fact, during some programs, you discover that other people who were closer to the headquarters didn't really attend as much as he did, or members from his branch did. And here is something interesting. The church where my father pastored then was far away from the headquarters. However, he found a way to make the people from his church and even himself participate in every program and every instruction that came from the headquarters. Still on following leadership, I didn't know how deep this had been ingrained inside of me until a time came I was to leave the denomination where my father was a pastor. I had to go to him and I had a conversation that I was leaving. I had to tell him why I was leaving and probably where I was going to. Before I ultimately left, he I waited for him to see reasons into my exit before I made it. Now, after I exited, elders from the church came to visit my father and then they informed him that I had left. To their surprise, he said that he is aware and I gave him my reasons. I did that and let it go. A few years afterwards, when I had reason to do something else, I discovered that I would always have to, appeal to the leadership at the point before I do certain things. I didn't know this thing had been this deep, like I said. But I would always find myself having to appeal to the authority, having to, seek approval of some sort before I do certain things. Maybe it's an exit or whatever it is. I could just go on and on and on talking about my father. Yeah. It was deeply ingrained into me. Looking back now, I realize how deep he was. I miss my father. I really do. Another lesson I picked up from my father is the virtue of prayer. You know, my father loved prayer. It wasn't a theory, it was a practice. In the latter part of his life, where he was ill and couldn't really go to church, move around, and all of that, he prayed. I have not seen my father pray that much prayer, in quantity as he did in the latter part of his life. Before that season of his life, I had seen him pray early morning, late at night, noontime. Sometimes we could just be sitting outside or something, and then he goes inside. If you pass by his room or you go to his room, you enter his room, you would find him praying. And he used to like this kneeling position a lot. My father prayed on his knees more than he did with any other position. I saw him on his knees a lot more than any other position. Sometimes even in church, he kneeled. My father loved prayer. Oh, he did. He did. In fact, it is one of the confidence I have that certain things can't get to me, because my father laid foundation and cleared the path for many. For some, he laid the foundation. For others, he cleared the path. I am just so convinced, so assured, at ease, because I know my father prayed for me. And I'm not just enjoying the sacrifices he made, I also internalize this same thing. I am consciously and at interval doing the same for myself and even for my children. In fact, long before I even had a child, I had established the culture and practice of praying for them. So my father taught me that, he lived it out, and I'm glad I picked it. The other thing, my father was a person of truth. Oh, my father was a person of truth. He was a person of truth. In fact, part of how he became an elder in our church, and he was regarded, and his thoughts, his counsel, his opinion was esteemed at community meetings and family meetings, is because of how he stood for the truth. Oh, he stood for the truth. I can't remember a season where my father had to bear false witness or he stood on the wrong side. Yes, as human being, at some point you discover that certain information might not have been accurate, but he never hid the truth in his heart and spoke a lie. No, no. You might discover, like I said, that the information were not accurate, but it wasn't something that he intentionally did to conceal the truth and let out a lie. He was a man of truth. It is part of why he quickly rose to become an elder in the church after several years. He was made an elder. It was the dedication, the zeal with which he executed this office that the then senior pastor actually recommended him to attend pastoral training and all of that. He was indeed a man of truth. I guess that's part of why when I hear people say things today, I try to probe into the truth of the matter. It's not just what happened, it is the sequence, why it happened, how did it happen. Because I want to be able to speak the truth that I know at all times. Lastly, my father was a very grateful person. Oh, he was a very grateful person. Very grateful. Whenever you do something for him, he would show gratitude. But much more than his gratitude to people, he was always grateful to God. At some point, we used to call him Pastor Thank God. Was it at some point? A lot of times, until his death and even his death. So sometimes we want to talk about our father, we'll say Pastor Thank God once said, things like that. He would thank God anything and everything. In fact, there's a particular time I remember he was to be promoted to a particular office, but for office politics and things like that, they didn't promote him. My father still said thank God. My father still said thank God. There was no event that happened and you would catch my father in regret, wailing, or things like that. He would, we thank God for that. We thank God for everything. My father lived grateful. He lived grateful. Oh, he lived grateful. And looking back, personally, I really don't have so much regret. Maybe I would have to sit, think again and again and again before I would have regrets. I'm grateful for a lot of things. Are there things I wish I did better? Absolutely. Are there things I wish happened better? Absolutely. But generally, I'm just grateful. I am just in that state of gratitude because I saw my father live this. Not just gratitude to people, but gratitude to God. It was a big deal for my father. These are the 7 lessons I learned from my father, and I decided to come share it with you. If you found any of them helpful, if you found any of them insightful, or maybe you want the conversation to continue around it, share in the comment section. My name is Roland Ebenezer. This episode was done in remembrance of my father who died some 7 years ago. Mommy. She's inside. We are going to meet her inside. Leave the son. Yeah? Yeah? Go, go. Look at where you are going. Be careful, yeah?